Beginning in 1556, at the beginning of world spirituality being thrown into flux, a sinister ancient tradition was being revived in Toro, lords of the Slave Coast. Under their king, Himerios Biriam, Toro began to be influenced by the Punic faith. This tradition was still a minority in parts of Zamor, some of them still worshipping at the ancient temples of Baal, which Toro took in their conquest. Himerios himself witnessed one of their sacrificial rituals when he was sent by his father to pacify the region, and was immediately entranced. This rite was known as a mulk. A bronze statue of their bull-headed god Baal was heated with coals from within, and children placed in the outstretched hands of the idol. They would burst into flames, and their bones would be cast into a nearby Tophet, or ritual mass grave. Baal, in exchange for the sacrifice, would grant the devotee power, wealth, longevity, and fertility. Back in the days of Carthage, sometimes hundreds would be sacrificed at a time. To a nation with near infinite human capital and a distinct lust for power, the Punic religion had found in Toro the perfect converts. A temple to Baal was erected in their capital of Gabu upon his ascension, and the faith swept the kingdom. Sacrifices would come to be made almost daily at the altar of Baal at Gabu, and the scent of human flesh would waft through the streets, buoyed by the smoke of incense and open barrels of exotic spices. Remembering the horror of those days, what little relations Toro had with the rest of the Western world would wither almost entirely. In 1559, Mongolistan executed a devastating invasion of Galicia Volhynia, nearly eliminating them all at once. This prompted Rome to provide greater aid to her allies in Eastern Europe. Beginning in November of that year, Samogisha, in order to fund its war with Norland, began a widespread campaign of privateering against nations not aligned with Rome, namely Avarignia, Triballia, and even Sirtia. This would prove especially bothersome to Avarignia as they depended on secure sea access to thrive, namely by way of their colony across the waves, Nicosia, which was growing by leaps and bounds. Indeed, Nicosia began to produce valuable crops, sending back coffee, sugar, and tobacco. In 1561, Nam Ning dealt a near-lethal blow to the Buddhist League, and also to Tian Shui, which supported them through a sense of pragmatism. The 1560s also saw the more local ambitions of Poyang bear fruit, conquering the rest of Luzon and colonizing much of the oceanic islands to their southeast. In 1562, a new imperator ascended to the throne of Phrygia, Hierotheros Agathoclid, who decided to not only break off Phrygia's alliance with Sirtia, but also invade Sirtia itself, angling for the conquest of Kosovo. Phrygia called Box in as an ally and even paid Arvernia for the trouble of joining, while Triballia and Avarignia came to the defense of Sirtia. Avarignia focused mainly on the North African front, sailing through Roman waters and landing in the province of Sirte. Meanwhile, Sirtia struggled with a two-front war, one which Triballia was attempting to help with, sailing through Roman waters and up the Adriatic Sea, landing at the Sirtian capital of Dubrovnik. A battle broke out in the Strait of Gibraltar, as Arvernian ships attempted to blockade the crossing, cutting off 40,000 Avarignian men from their supply lines in the homeland. Luckily, these ships were primitive and dashed against the rocks rather quickly. However, Phrygia's fleet numbered in the hundreds, and even if they couldn't match Avarigine vessels for quality, they could certainly overwhelm them. As such, the Avarignian fleet was stationed to defend the Strait of Gibraltar, while Phrygian vessels blockaded the east and Arvernian vessels blockaded the west. A massive shipbuilding project ensued, with collective hundreds of sailors being trained at once, and indeed, this age would produce some of the finest of their age. In 1562, the blockades were driven away, and the North African campaign was making eastward progress. Yet, the war was still being lost. Sirtia was in dire straits, and it was questionable for how much longer they could withstand the onslaught from their former ally. Indeed, later that year, the North African campaign was pushed back, and the war was lost in 1563, Sirtia losing much more than just Kosovo in the peace deal, nearly being cleaved in half. In 1564, Poyang and Liuzhou launched a joint invasion of Gaizhou, and defeated it in 1566. In 1568, Rex Vermudo and Achitas de Roma ascended to the throne of Avarignia. In 1578, a new Avarignian colonial polity came to be, Trunahinth, translating to the power below. In 1579, Rajasthan began to rival Poyang in the Indonesian islands, colonizing Pasai. In 1581, Poyang began its colonization of Australia, carrying out a wholesale slaughter of the natives they found there. The Fushi declared Australia the sole domain of Poyang thereafter, but then threw open the oceanic islands as a universal zone of colonization for followers of the Yuzhou Church. In 1582, the Serdia Resurgence War began. Serdia, once a faithful ally of Phrygia, had been trusted with Phrygian war doctrine and defensive structures, as well as weaknesses in need of improvement. With this information, Serdia was able to court Mongolistan into war with Phrygia, into which Avarignia was also called. Desperate, Phrygia called in Baks, paid off Avarignia once more, and offered concessions in the control of Indian Ocean trade to Rajasthan, which accepted and declared war against Mongolistan. Finally, Norland, seeking to gain favor with Rome by attacking their greatest geopolitical enemy, Phrygia, joined the war on the side of Serdia. Indeed, this was devastating in the extreme, featuring gruesome loss of life characterized by a Serdian ferocity, digging deep into Greece, and a grand Mongol push towards the Holy Land. As such, Avarignia sent 80,000 men north to attack Arvernia, and sent roughly 112 ships to the Mediterranean in order to hunt enemy fleets, and contest them wherever they sailed. The war eventually ended in 1590, with Serdia taking much of the Phrygian Balkans and returning to glory, while Mongolistan conquered the Strait of Hormuz from Phrygia and curtailed Rajasthani power by annexing their portion of the Middle East. This also marked the start of Europe's real exposure to Christianity, with the Zostanol Church rapidly gaining popularity in Serdia, people converting by the thousands, including the Kral himself, Svetoslav Elts. Beginning in 1600, the Karidi family attempted to level their wealth with the crown payments received by the Depravia family, by way of debasing local coinage and pocketing the profit. They used this profit to build cafes, wherein radical ideas of republicanism were discussed. The colonial governors of Nicosia, tired of the constant provocations on the part of the Karidi, had roughly a dozen high-ranking members of the family rounded up on corruption charges and due to be executed by hanging in the capital Dominica. One of them, however, made a daring escape, the rope meant to hang him snapping as he crashed to the ground and leapt into the ocean, hands and feet bound. Regardless of this, the move kneecapped the Karidi family. Their cafes were shut down, and it was doubtful that they'd ever recover from such a blow. At least, that was through normal means. Hearing of the methods used by the Samogitians back in Europe, the surviving members of the Karidi family used the last of their wealth to buy private vessels to privateer Kaimor, the colonial holding of Nam Ning on the continent of Pangnan, as well as the colony of Nikosate itself. This allowed them to raise private funds, which in turn allowed them to posture against the Depravia family, all the while maintaining plausible deniability regarding these unmarked ships. These reports of rampant piracy in the Windward Isles began to proliferate. This caught both the Depravia family and the colonists of Kaimor absolutely off guard. Reports said a vast fleet of nearly 100 ships was sailing about the Caribbean and reaping the wealth of the New World for itself. These ships were flying bastardized banners of Avarignia, the black flags bearing a skull in some manner or other. Among these pirates, the name of one man was mentioned more than any other. The name of a dead man with a scar about his neck. Kairos Caridus. The Crown sent 50 of its finest ships to Nikosate under the command of Captain Amalric de Pravia. Almost immediately after his arrival, the Battle of the Jamaica Channel took place. The Crown ships docking in this all-important port, the Black Fleet of the Hanged Man did not arrive as was expected. Instead, a single ship arrived, and a single dinghy set out to demand Amalric's surrender. When the messenger came aboard and delivered his message, Amalric shot him between the eyes. As the shot rang out, he heard a mighty clamoring up the sides of his ship, as the pirates of the Black Fleet drove their knives and hooks and ropes into the sides of his flagship, and boarded his vessel. He looked to the coast to see men pouring out of the prisons and bars of the Port of Zui, as he realized he had fallen into a trap. A great battle ensued, almost entirely sword to sword and hand to hand, as the crown ships attempted to flee. Captain Amalric was able to direct his men below deck to set the black powder rigged to blow, and they escaped the Jamaica Channel on a small fishing vessel. As the ship was blown to pieces from within, at least 200 pirates instantly died. This didn't change the fact that the Port of Zui, and in fact the entire Jamaica Channel, already belonged to the hanged man Kyrus and his Black Fleet, before the crown ships ever even arrived. Only 20 of the 50 made it out intact. On the horizon, they raised the black flag over the city hall, a flag of piracy and ultimately a flag of rebellion against the crown of Avarignia. Thus was established the Pirate Republic of Zaratherma, translated as the place of golden freedom. This was only but the start of their legendary struggle, the finest rivalry that the seas had ever seen.